We are ready to begin our presentation today. With all of our presentations at Railroads, we begin by acknowledging that we live, learn, and work on the traditional lands of the Kasepsum and Lekwungen families. There has been a long, long legacy of learning and teaching on these lands, and we are so respectful and fortunate for our place within that now. Despite my lovely background, we are not at Railroads University at the moment. Globally, we are facing a health crisis, and with that have come many changes. So here at Railroads, one of the changes that we've experienced is many of us are now working from home. So with that said, we may face some technology challenges that are new to all of us, but please use that raise hand button, communicate with us in the chat box, and we'll be able to help navigate those challenges as they come. We recognize that many folks all over the world are facing changes, transitions, and challenges that come along with these turbulent times. So if there's anything we can do at Railroads University, please let us know. We are here today to talk about our Master of Arts and Graduate Diploma in Disaster and Emergency Management. My name is Selena Kunar, and I'm an Education Advisor here at Railroads University, and I'm joined by Dr. Jean Slick, who is the Program Head of our DEM programs. Jean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, nice to see everyone today. Thanks for joining us. I've been teaching at Railroads since 2009 as a full-time faculty member, and was a part-time instructor in the program before that.
Wonderful, Jean, thank you. There's also some folks joining us that you can't see on video, but you'll see them in our chat box. So one being Alana McConaughey. Alana is also an education advisor and here to help out if we do face any tech challenges. So thank you so much for being here, Alana. And then we also have Bev Hill. Bev is a member of our enrollment team, and she'll be in the chat box popping in helpful links and answering questions that may come up as well. So a big thank you to you as well, Bev, for being here. And I see both Bev and Alana have said a wonderful hello in our chat box. So with that, you've learned a little bit about us, and we would love to know a little bit about all of you. So if you feel comfortable in the chat box, letting us know, where are you coming from? What field are you currently working in? And perhaps what brought you to the webinar today? That would be wonderful. So while we have some of those introductions coming in, I'll continue to explore how we're going to move through our agenda today. So once we get to get a little bit more familiar with one another, we'll be exploring the Royal Roads University experience, talking about the programs themselves, and walking through the application process as well as requirements for these programs. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, but we really encourage folks to please pop things in the chat box as we're going along, and we're happy to answer any questions that come up for you. So with that said, I'll turn my head to our chat box and see here that we have folks from James Bay, Saanich, Victoria, Ottawa, Ontario, Jeff with Fleet Services from the Strathcona County, from Duncan, oh, Cynthia from Ottawa as well, Ben from Calgary, who runs the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, who teaches an elective course in this program. Thank you so much for joining us. Lucinda from the UK, Miriam from Toronto. Wow, so it looks like we have representation absolutely from coast to coast in Canada and globally as well. So please continue popping in your introductions in the chat box, and I encourage everyone to take a peek at who we have with us in the room today. I think this is a wonderful example of the diversity in our cohorts we see for this program. So this is a great way to get a feeling for who's excited to learn more just like you. So with that said, we'd like to talk about some of the things that we value on our campus. And that starts with all of you. From folks like myself, Alana, Bev, who will be a part of your journey with Railroads prior to applying for a program, all throughout your support teams, and then your teaching teams as well, such as Jean, you'll notice that we are all here to know who you are, what motivates you, what drives you, how can we ensure that this educational journey with Royal Roads University is targeted specifically to you? Alana so wonderfully shares that she's on her second degree with Royal Roads University and still doesn't know her student number. I think that is a beautiful, beautiful representation of the personalized touch we take to our learners' learning experience. Next, our real-world classrooms. We're quite fortunate to have educators like Jean leading the charge who are not only academic experts in their fields, but who are out in the world putting into practice what they're bringing into our classrooms. That allows us to not have a divide of out there and in here. This ensures that all of the education we're bringing into our classrooms is relevant, is immediately applicable to the challenges and opportunities you're facing in your personal and professional worlds. Learning together forever. So some other folks you'll find in your classroom are your cohort members. Many of our programs at Railroad subscribe to this cohort learning model, which means you move through your program with your carefully selected group of learners from start all the way to finish. This is wonderful as it allows you not only to build impressive and deep academic learning and supportive networks, but you also end up finding friends forever, personal connections forever. Through my role at Railroads, I'm regularly connecting with alumni who are so excited to share that their WhatsApp chats, their Facebook groups continue on long after convocation. So while your journey begins in our classroom, they truly continue on forever. And finally, life is also an education. So I'll touch on this more as we get to the application process, but here at Railroads, we recognize not all learning happens in a classroom. Actually, especially at Railroads, we recognize not all learning happens in the classroom. It's important to us to understand your professional, your personal, your academic background, all of the different experiences that have helped encompass who you are today. And you'll see that reflected in our flexible admissions model. We are very lucky to have a beautiful physical location in Victoria, BC. But alongside our physical location, we have over 25 years of experience with online education. So many of our programs, including those we're talking about today, are delivered through a blended format, which means typically they'll have an online component as well as an on-campus component. That said, there are many programs on our campus for the past 25 years that we've hosted fully online. So that showcases that not only do we have the pedagogy to be teaching online, we also have the technical capacity as well. Jean, I'm not sure if you wanted to touch a little bit about the 25 years of experience Royal Roads University has teaching online.
Yeah, thanks. So just to situate, I think that particularly in this era during the pandemic, while all universities have had to, as they say, pivot online, we call that really remote and emergency teaching. And that's quite different than when you actually have designed courses for delivery in an online environment. And so I think the key thing here is that we have experience with online delivery. Our MADEM program in particular, most of the courses are delivered online. And so it's we have just a different depth of experience. And so the adaptation in terms of the pandemic for us has been less of a journey than for many other institutions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jean. And with that, I will pass over the virtual microphone and we'll explore more about these programs themselves.
Okay, thank you. So to start, just want to say that we've got the two different degrees. We've got the Master of Arts, which is a 2-year degree, 2 years and a little bit more, just a few months, weeks more, I think. And then normally that has 2 online, 2 face-to-face residencies. And then we have a graduate diploma, which is 1 year in length. So the benefits, some students will start with a diploma if they're not sure if they want to do a full degree. And then after they've started taking the first course or 2, then they transition into the master's program. I'm going to say probably many, but not all of the grad diploma students do end up transitioning to a Master of Arts. The other thing is that some students will start off with a Master of Arts and then their life might get in the way. So we have some military members as an example who might get posting abroad and are not really able, depending on the nature of the posting, to continue. So if you finish the first year, the first 18 credits, then you can switch from the Master of Arts to the graduate diploma, get your credential, and then when you have time, come back and reapply and join to continue the rest of your degree. Further, we have some students who come to us already with a master's degree in another field, and so that's where the graduate diploma might come into play. But we put a note on here to say that the structure of residencies will be different online. So just as an example, we had to do the rapid transition during the pandemic in March, and so rather than having a online virtual residency, we just changed it to an online course with some what we call synchronous activity, online activity like this, but with that synchronous activity being optional. So I'll talk a little bit more about expectations for the pandemic in a moment. So go to the next slide. So in the second year, so in the first year of your program, every student in our program takes the same set of courses. When you get to the second year, there are some choices. And these choices are based on the fact that we recognize people come to a graduate degree with different motives and that there are different opportunities. So we have a thesis track, and I'm going to say that maybe a quarter of our students usually take this track. If you take the thesis track, you take a second advanced research course, and then you've got a year to research, write, and defend your thesis. Extensions are possible, and in the last year we waived the extension fee. So if there's an extension, there's no longer any cost to that. We have a course-based track, and there's really two versions to a course-based track. One where you take electives, and Ben, who's joining us today, teaches in one of those electives. And then you would, so you'll take some these electives and then do a final, what we call short paper. It's a final short research paper. So it's not primary research, but you take a particular topic that you're interested in, look at the literature related to that topic, and then write up some recommendations for practice, but that are grounded in research. Other students can do the course-based track, but do an internship option. So for 2 of your elective courses, you would take the internship. And with that, you need to do 420 hours of work in another organization. It can be in your same organization, but it has to be with a different supervisor than you would normally have, as well as some coursework. And we have an internship prep course that sets students up for success and helps to ensure that you've got an internship prior to the start. So I'm just curious in terms of whether you're interested in the MA and or the diploma, if you could just let us know. So we've got some questions here already, just to clarify. So it's a thesis and not a dissertation, correct? So dissertations usually refers to doctoral level, and thesis often refers to the master's level, although actually at some places thesis is also used at a doctoral level. But for our work, it's a thesis. And in terms, Sarah's asking about where students have done internships. We've had students do internships at a whole host of organizations. We've got somebody who's just doing one right now in BC with First Nations Health Authority related to the pandemic. People have worked with transport organizations in the private sector, in the not-for-profit sector. So what we try and do there is in the internship prep course, Sarah, we look at what your actual career goals are and then help you think through internships in that field. So that gives you an opportunity to try and advance your career. The students who do internship are often people who come with a relevant undergrad but don't have experience, or people who have experience but want to switch sort of tracks in terms of their career. So the one that I gave is an example with a student working in a First Nations Health Authority. He actually works in BC Center for Disease Control in the lab, but wants to move more into emergency management practice. So can you use your regular job for that internship? No, you can't. And that's where you can do it in the same organization, but it needs to be a different project with a different supervisor. So again, we have an internship prep course to help. And then as the program head, I'm also available to consult throughout your program of study to give advice and to talk one-on-one with students. And that's part of that sort of personal getting to know people one-on-one that Selena talked about earlier. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So just want to talk now about our program, but I'm going to do it in the context of COVID and the pandemic because I think it's, you know, irresponsible to not do that. So we're going to, this is sort of how I want to tell you a bit about our program, but also how we're adapting and what that looks like. So we'll go to the next slide. So just, I wanted to offer some pandemic planning assumptions and to say that myself and Dr. Robin Cox, who teaches in our program, as well as Tamara Holmes-Dixon, the three of us are advising our president and university on how to function in the time of the pandemic. And so one of the things that is helpful when you're dealing with, so a crisis is defined in terms of a threat and uncertainty. And so when you've got uncertainty, the use of assumptions, planning assumptions are really helpful. So we are situating and framing the pandemic as a tipping event. Given the global nature of the pandemic and the extent of it and the indirect and ripple effects on society, direct, indirect, and ripple effects on society, we see this as prompting significant change. We are also saying that we'll be living with the threat of COVID for the next 18 to 24 months or until there's a vaccine, herd immunity, or effective treatment. And therefore, in this time period, we're going to be dealing with physical distance and other non-pharmaceutical interventions. So anything other than a vaccine, so that would be mask wearing, washing your hands, etc. Now, when we're proposing these assumptions, we actually have citations. So this is what we're recommending and saying in terms of the impact on the university, but we're also, this is grounded in the literature and the research out there, broader research being done. Interestingly, I'm just going to give you a tidbit of information that I find fascinating. So of all of the pandemics that we've faced globally in the last 300 years, only one has ever been managed by a vaccine. That was in 2009 and 10. It was an influenza pandemic, and it came after the peak. So we've never actually ever had a vaccine that has been developed in time to manage a pandemic. We don't know about the degree of natural immunity or how long immunity from a vaccine may last. So really the best thing we can all do, which we know, is public health measures. And we could significantly bring the impact of this pandemic around the world down globally if we could just get everybody to follow these basic measures. So implications then. Face-to-face classes, as we have known them, will not be possible in what we call in BC stage 3. Now there's different stages in different places, in different provinces and in different countries. So at this stage, we have no more than 50 people in BC being gathered in a stage 3. And so there's minimum square foot space for each individual, in addition to the 6 feet apart distancing requirement. So it's not just that you have people 6 feet apart, there's also that there has to be a certain number of square meters for each individual in a room. So rooms are going to have at least half capacity over what they had before or less. So that means that we're not able to hold classes in the normal way. In BC, the universities at this time are all having classes online until January, but that doesn't mean that they won't continue to be online past January. That's just sort of the current planning period. And the decision making is happening now about what happens beyond that. That being said, and while Royal Roads as a university has to follow what the provincial guidelines are, the reality of what we know in terms of COVID is such that we're planning already for not having face-to-face residencies in the winter period when your first residency would happen. So just curious, and I'll talk to you in a moment about what the alternatives to that will be. So just curious about how your life's been impacted by the pandemic and how it's affected your plans for university. you're welcome to share those thoughts with us in the chat box as well. We know we've all been impacted in different ways. And what I've been trying to do is just do a high level of consultation with our students, but as well, I've just completed a prospect survey to get input from people like yourselves who are considering applying. So we could go to the next slide. Thanks. So now I want to just talk a little bit about the program, move off the pandemic and get back to normal for a sec. So just want to give you an example about what an online class looks like to begin with. So our 502, Foundations of Disaster and Emergency Management, is the first course that you'll take in the program. And our reason for having that is people come from really diverse backgrounds and experience and education and knowledge. And so this helps to get everybody to a common frame of reference and to delve into the literature, academic literature in this field. But we, as I'm going to show you, we always link that back to the real world and practice. And again, that ties back to what Selena talked about earlier about connecting to the real world. So there's 3 units in this course. And if we can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give an example of 3 different weeks during this course. So in the first week, we would start with some academic readings. There'll be 3 academic readings that talk about defining disasters. And so we're going to look at different historical ways in which disasters have been conceptualized. And just broadly, we can talk about disasters as being acts of nature or acts of God. We will sometimes hear that. But we'll also see disasters framed as acts of men and women. And so you'll discuss these definitions within your team. And then in the second week, each member of your team will choose a different definition of disaster from the academic literature. And then you would individually review, you'd have a choice of a couple of disaster events. And some of the ones we've looked at in the past have been the 2014 Manitoba floods or the 2013 Lac-Mégantic train derailment. Then you'll find at least 3 to 4 media reports that exemplify the definition of the disaster that you selected. So you'll just spend some time Googling, looking at the disaster, find news reports, and then you're going to read it, but you're going to read it with a critical eye to looking at the way in which people have described the event. And you want to think about how that event description in the media relates to these different definitions of a disaster. And then you'll share and compare your findings. And so that you'll see that those 2 activities have both individual activity of reading and searching, but also some comparative work within and collaboration work within your team. And so team-based activities are part of all of what we do. And just another example of sort of how we bring the real world into the classroom in week 7. Each member of your team critically analyzes a different provincial Provinces or Territories Emergency Management Act. If you're from a different country, so from the UK, we had someone joining us today, I believe. You could also choose from a different country. And so you would analyze existing, the existing legislation and core policies or regulations that exist. So taking that, but then doing a critical analysis again. So looking at within emergency management activities. So prevention, preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. Which elements are included or excluded? And there are some patterns related to that. And then think about what those implications are for practice. And then going back and looking at the definitions of terms within there. So in my own look at some of the emergency management legislation in Canada, some of the definitions of disaster, for example, are quite antiquated and not current. And so you'll see in province of BC just has gone through a large public consultation about updating its own Emergency Management Act. And one of the key pieces in there is around defining disaster. So I, in my input to that process, talked about the critical nature of thinking about these definitions. This is just an example of the first class and some of the kinds of activities. So while it's a graduate program and you're going to have to delve into and read academic literature, and if you've not done that before, for the first time, people find that a bit daunting, but you can make your way through it, as many of our students have successfully done. And so in some of the course classes, we will select literature for you to read, and others will let you select some literature. So go to the next slide. And then in disaster and emergency management 503, which is a course I teach on facilitation, coordination, and decision making. So this is a course that's normally delivered during a residency. What will happen is during the pandemic, while we're not able to hold classes online, we will be delivering this course virtually. There will be some synchronous activity in there, and what we've been doing is consulting with students about the best form of that synchronous activity. So what you would do here is select a recent disaster, and this is a team-based assignment. So teams have to select a disaster, and so I have people spend time talking about why they want to choose different events. And then you're going to select and find examples of emergent response to disaster. So there's an existing typology of different types of organizations. So established organizations are those that have responsibility for emergency management, so a local emergency management authority. Expanding organizations are groups like not-for-profits like Salvation Army or the Red Cross that have a small core, but in times of disaster can grow with a volunteer base. Extending organizations are groups that don't typically have a disaster response role, but may step in. So you might see a utility company, it could be a business like Home Depot or Canadian Tire. And emergent groups are groups where people just spontaneously respond. And so there's been a phenomenon in Canada, for example, of caremongering groups coming out during the pandemic. And so that's an example of type 4. So this activity focuses really on the type 4 response. And then you'll deliver a presentation. And so we've got ways of delivering presentations virtually. Next slide. Another example of material that we cover in this course is thinking about situational awareness. So we bring you again back to the literature, and so helping us to get a sense. And so there's a lot, particularly in terms of situational awareness and models like this, that are very applicable in terms of the context of the pandemic. Next slide. And then finally, one of the topics we cover off in this course, the 503 course, is crisis leadership. And so there's so much that's rich about the pandemic context to study in this regard, in terms of, like meaning making, decision making, and sense making in this context, and how that's being carried out in different ways by different countries right now. And I'm part of a multinational comparative case study looking at different countries' approach to the pandemic response. And what we're seeing is people are making sense of this in different ways. If you think of some countries as for example, as saying, it's not the pandemic, COVID-19 is not really a threat. We're going to take more of a laissez-faire approach, where others are, like New Zealand, are saying we're going to eliminate COVID from our country. Next slide. So back to COVID adaptations during the COVID pandemic. We are assuming that the first residency courses are going to be online rather than face-to-face. Now, I know that's a huge disappointment because people often want to come to residency and it's where you meet people face-to-face. We're going to do some things with this next intake to help, though. We will have an online orientation that will start earlier, late November, early December. We haven't got the dates of that up yet, but it will be up soon. And so there'll be an online orientation where you'll get a chance to meet your class and to start to engage in teams and get to know one another before your first course. And then when we get to what are typically the first residency courses, there will be both some required and some optional synchronous activity. And so it will create a space where we can still continue to deliver the quality of education, but via these virtual platforms. Now, we can use Zoom, but we actually have a different platform that we use called Collaborate that sits within Moodle, which is the online learning management system that we use for our program. So that's available to us. So, but one of the things we've been considering is about whether it would be helpful to offer an online only offering of the program, so that if you were to sign up for the program and you knew that both of the residencies, in quotes, both of those were going to be offered virtually. Would you prefer to attend a residency in person in the second year, if that's possible, or would you prefer to have an online only offering of the program? So I'm going to ask if you could post online or face-to-face in as your choice for the second res, and what your preference would be in the chat box. And as you're doing that, I'm going to say I've done a survey with our prospects, and a good number of people, over 59%, said that they would like an online. Now, the benefit for our program is that we actually have 2 intakes per year. So when you sign up, we have enough students usually that we have 2 simultaneous cohorts. And so one of our thoughts is that we might have one of those that would have face-to-face when it's possible to return, but that we could have one cohort that stayed online for that entire period of time, which would then give some certainty, a little bit more certainty to everyone. So we've got a mix here actually. And before we log off, I'm going to go back and figure out those stats to figure out sort of the balance. We've got a number of people that are saying that they would like online, but there's a significant number that still would like to do face-to-face. And that's what students like, you know, getting together and knowing people face-to-face is always a different experience. Okay, so thanks continue to post your responses to that, and we'll move on to the next slide. And that's back to you, Selena.
Over to me. Thank you so much, Jean. Before we jump into the application process, I just saw that we had a question here asking about, so apart from the residency activities, are the classes typically asynchronous?
Yes. So other than the residencies, all of the classes are what we call asynchronous. So that basically means that you're not being required to be online at the same time. So you're all working online. It is a structured activity, and so those examples I gave you of the activities, there are week-by-week assignments, and there are due dates related to those assignments. But that still gives you some flexibility within the week as to when you do things. And most instructors, myself included, will have a weekly video. So we bring ourselves into the virtual space that way, where we'll talk about the material. Some instructors will also do what they call optional synchronous activity, which is that instead of it just being posting an online video, I'll do a presentation, but people can join in and ask questions as we go along. I might then record that and then put that up in the class for sharing. So we have optional asynchronous or optional synchronous activity, but it's only the residencies that are required face-to-face. And that format is really what helps and supports people being able to continue their education while you're working.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm actually one of the learners in Ben's elective course right now, and that has exactly been my experience, that we have coursework that it is bound in dates, but there's lots of opportunity where he's always available for these face-to-face sessions, and when I'm able to attend, wonderful, and weeks that I'm not, they are recorded. So like you said, Jean, making it manageable for someone who's working full-time is such a strong component of this program.
And then I see we've got a question about doing a certificate program at Ryerson, and so would we accept courses? We do have a process for transfer credits, but it does have to be transfer credits at a graduate level. So our advisors can also help you with that and point you to the guidelines. And if you are applying for transfer credit, then we would review that.
And we had another question as well. So is there information available on employment outcomes for program alumni? Mm-hmm. And I'll note that Bev has shared that we encourage our applicants to chat with our alumni as well, who can share about their RU experience and how they're applying their learning. So if you would like to connect directly with alumni from this program, you can always message Bev and she'll be happy to to set that up for you. But Jean, I'll pass it over to you in case you have some helpful information about the employment outcomes for your learners.
Sure. So we have two groups of learners. We have students who come to us with a relevant undergrad degree, but no experience. And so it really depends on the backgrounds that people bring as to sort of where they go. We've had people with degrees with an environmental background, right? So where they've gone, we've had people with an environmental background that end up going and working for provincial governments or with health authorities. So it really depends on what your background is. Many of our students are already working in the field. And so in terms of employment outcomes, the question isn't really as relevant because they're already working in the field. And then we have students who have worked in a related field. So some of our folks in the military, but who want to transition and start to work more directly in the field. And again, depends on your background and interests. And what I would say is students who take the internship track have often been very successful in leveraging those internship opportunities into jobs, longer term jobs, or jobs with those potential employers. So we don't keep track of employment outcomes in that way, but I can also say that during the course of the program, it's not uncommon that many of the students in the program will be able to change jobs while they're in our program. I'll give you one example. We have a nurse in Ontario, in London, Ontario, and she'd been working with children in the hospital context, but there was a position that came up with emergency management within the hospital, and she was able to successfully move into that role just based on her enrollment in the program. So we see people making shifts. We have a woman from Calgary who's an architect, and she was able to get a job working with the emergency management agency there with her background and the fit. So people are able to use what they've got to often leverage. So it's not just an employment outcome at the end of the program, but there's also a lot of transition during the program. And then further, we've talked about our cohort model. And so you're actually connected to a large group of people, and many, as I said, many of them are already working in the field. And so that network in and of itself has been helpful for others. And then as a program head, I will also connect people. So if you're interested in working in a particular field or looking for contacts, then we've got students from across the years, as well as, the faculty's own professional network, and we'll do what we can to help connect you in different ways. So not a direct answer to your question, but an indirect response.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jean. So it looks like we've answered all of the questions so far. So I'll continue on and we'll touch on the application process and requirements. But as things are bubbling, please continue to pop them in the chat box. We're just around the corner from our Q&A session. So we'll pick back up and answer the things that are shown up in our chat box. So with that, how to apply? We start by wanting to talk about the admissions into these programs. So standard admissions would require a 4-year or comparable undergraduate degree in a related and relevant field with a minimum GPA of a B+ from a recognized post-secondary institution. And I'll note that as we move along our application process and admission requirements, you'll see the asterisks beside some things there. And that notes, if you head to our website, there'll be a more robust explanation. In this case, for example, what relevant and related field could look like. So as we go along, you'll hear me refer back to our website quite often, as it is a handy handbook for how to move through this process. So moving to flexible admissions. Flexible admissions is a wonderful option for those candidates who are thinking, hey, yes, this program is for me. This program can provide me with so much, and I can also provide this program with so much. Flexible admissions, as you'll see as we go through, is generally for folks who have been working in the field for a long time and have that lived experience within this sector. So we have a few different ways you can move through flexible admissions. The first being applicants without an undergraduate degree will normally require 10 years of work experience, with a minimum of 2 years of relevant professional experience in leadership or management, or an equivalent combination of education and experience. Flexible admissions is also for applicants who meet the degree requirement, but perhaps not the GPA requirement. They would then be required to have a minimum of 5 years of relevant professional experience. And to ensure that we are setting up our learners for the best success, flexible admission candidates are required to complete the academic writing and critical thinking course several weeks prior to starting the program and obtaining a minimum of a B+. Academic writing and critical thinking is a very well-loved course at our university. We have many, many learners coming through both standard and flexible admissions who elect to take this course prior to beginning their studies. So I believe we are now offering this course almost once a month due to the amount of interest that our learners have in taking this course to ensure that they're setting themselves up for the best success as well. So if you have any questions in particular about academic writing and critical thinking, connect with Bev and she'll be able to provide you with some more information. I'll note that all of our flexible admission applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis. So if you're wondering how flexible admissions could apply to you, please connect with our offices. We'd be more than happy to begin that conversation. The application process itself. So the online process begins with starting your online application, which includes a fee of $123.81. And once that application is in, we then look for some supporting documents. We like to note that we do not need to receive these supporting documents in a nice, complete package. We highly recommend folks send the supporting documents as you have them ticked off. So starting with official transcripts, official meaning that they do need to arrive at our institution sealed. A personal statement. We have some wonderful tips and tricks on our website as to what we're looking for to be answered within your personal statement, as well as page length and things like that. Next, a structured resume. So again, on our website, we have some wonderful information as to how you can structure this resume to ensure that all of your experiences shine bright. And finally, 2 letters of reference. And our handy dandy website, again, has information about who these referees should be and how they can submit their letters to our university. I will note that we accept your applications on an ongoing basis. So this means we actually don't wait until an intake deadline, our application deadline, to look at all the applications and then see, okay, who's going to have a seat in our program. As your online application comes in and your supporting documents are completed, your file is adjudicated and we're able to let you know about your status in our program. So if there is an intake you're interested in, we highly recommend getting in that online application and getting started on your supporting documents sooner than later. Talking about our upcoming intakes, on the slide here, you can see the dates for those intakes. So if you're interested in starting the program in 2021, it will actually begin January 11th, 2021, putting its application deadline at August 31st, 2020. If you're looking a bit further out, we do have our 2022 deadline posted as well. So the program itself would begin January 10th, 2022, putting its application deadline at August 31st, 2021. And as Jean mentioned, we offer 2 intakes per year, and we may start an online-only version of the program with an earlier start date for 2022. So if you have any questions about any of the deadlines you see here or the opportunity for an online-only version of the program, again, please connect with Bev, myself, or Jean directly, and we're happy to provide you with more information. Recognizing that financial planning is a critical component to your educational journey, we like to quite early on highlight that we have a wonderful financial aid and awards office on our campus who are staffed with specialists who have their fingertips on internal but also external resources that could be available to you. So if you have any questions about financial aid, you can connect with the Financial Aids and Award Office via their website listed here, or their direct phone numbers as well. Enrollment services. So Bev, who has been wonderful in our chat box, answering questions, is such a great example of the team that we have on our campus, who's eager to answer any questions you may have about this program or any others as well. So if you'd like to connect with Bev and her team, you can do so by emailing learn.more@royalroads.ca. And if you're joining us internationally, our international admission and registration team would be more than happy to continue the conversation at learn.more.international@royalroads.ca. And with all of that said, we have come to the end of our webinar and the start of our Q&A session. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing our screen and we'll move our attention over to our chat box. So again, please continue popping any questions you have in the chat box and we'll get to them shortly. So to kick us off, Jean, you may be muted.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions there. So Lana, on behalf of a participant, the webinar is specific to the DEM program, but wondering about general expectations at a master's level in terms of a jump from an undergrad to master's. And things like grade spacing classes out to fit your day jobs. So the program, let me answer the last part. Spacing courses out. Our courses are all 9 weeks in length and they have a 2-week break in between. And generally that equates to, I'm going to say, sort of 11 to 15 hours a week of work for a student. People read at different space. You know, we all take different amounts of time to do things. So that's the difference. The question about grades is really interesting. So there is a significant difference in terms of grading at grad and versus undergrad. So at a grad level, your grades need to be in the A's and B's. We don't actually have C's and D's. We only have A's and B's, and then it's a fail. So the expectation is that your grades will always be in the A and B grade range. And so the other thing that's really helpful in terms of understanding expectations, if you've not feeling strong about writing, or your grades in an undergrad weren't strong, then you would have to take the academic writing and critical thinking. And then we have all of our flexible admission students take that course as well. And that's also to get people up to the standard that's required. And so we do require a grade of a B+ or higher from that course, and a B+ or higher is sort of what you want to have in your graduate program of study. So a B- in terms of a grad program is a low grade and actually drops your grade point. You need to have a grade point average of B or higher, cumulative grade point average to graduate. So we then have a question about international study permits. So I'll turn that over to someone else.
Great question from Francesca. So Bev has provided some information in our chat box for you to connect directly with our learn.more.international@Royal team, as they're the folks who are specialized on our campus to help answer any questions you might have about study permits from your sending country. But thank you so much for the great question.
And then also, I think the other thing just on international study permits is, and they can help you with this as well, is just that there are some government restrictions in times of COVID around international study permits. And so it's a little more complicated in time of the pandemic. And so again, that's why online only offerings of our programs may be a way to go for some students at this stage. And then we've got a question about, just to clarify, 2 intakes per year, I mean 2 cohorts starting on the same date. That's true. However, for 2022, we do expect that there may be a difference in terms of those start dates. We don't have that information up. We're still doing the background work on that. So for the current year in January 2021, yes, start dates will be the same, but by 2022, we think that there'll be a difference in the start dates for the 2 cohorts, with the online only one being a different date, a bit earlier start is what I would say. How is your grade point average assessed? So grades have points associated with them, and then it's just based on an average, which factors in the number of credits that you've got. And so your grade point average, you know, if you've got 2 A's, you've got an overall average of an A. If you've got mixed grades in there, then it's based on the grade point in there. You can get further information from that by just Googling grades RRU, and it provides more detail, specific detail on the grade points for each grade. What proportion of the students are flexible versus standard? Oh, it's really mixed. I'm going to say that our program has a good number of flexible students. So I'm gonna like just guess and say half and half. I don't know, Bev, you might have a better sense, but and it will vary from year to year as well. But we have, what I can say is it's less typical in our program to have somebody who comes directly from an undergrad program and into this grad program. That would be the exception. We do have students who finish an undergrad and come directly into this. Most of our students, even with standard admission, will have some work experience before they will come to our program. So we opened it up a few years ago so that students who had a relevant undergrad could come in. It used to be you had to have work experience attached with it, but we also now recognize that a professional master's, like the one we offer, people who have a relevant undergrad can be successful in this. And so we've got a mix. So people in the program bring these different kinds of backgrounds. Some bring more work experience, some bring more educational experience, and students then collaboratively work together. Is all coursework and information sent to students at once, or is it possible to work or read ahead? Great question, Graham. So what happens is each of our courses are, and this is again goes back to all of our experience of teaching online. This is not something we've just done for the pandemic. So our courses are structured and built in advance, and we use what we call Moodle, which is an open source software for our learning management system. So the course is all designed in Moodle. The course will open on the start date, the beginning of the 9 weeks, and all of the information from the course is available as of that date. Occasionally, students will be traveling for work or have additional work demands. And so in the 2-week break between courses, they might want to have access to the reading list so they can get a jump on the reading. You can't get a jump on the activities in the course, but we could give you access to a reading list, and a staff in our office would help facilitate that. So it is possible to read ahead, but the volume of work is enough for you to do in a week. And so we balance that out in terms of the design. So as you get access to each course, you get access to the entire course, list of all the assignments, list of all the readings, list of all the activities. You get a good feel, you know when the due dates are. So none of that is a surprise. And so just curious if there's any other questions out there in terms of things that would be important to you at this time or important to you during the pandemic in terms of considering your education. So our grades assigned through tests, written assignments, a combination thereof. Okay, so I'm going to say, generally speaking, at least in the core courses in the program, there are no tests or exams. And this is a part of the difference at a graduate level. At a graduate level, we're looking for you to do we're looking for your critical thinking and your work. So there may be team assignments, which could include a presentation. In the 503 course I teach, one of the assignments is that you make a narrated PowerPoint video, which you record. And so instead of writing a paper, we have alternatives. In our course on disaster risk management, you'll write a briefing note, which is something you would do in the workplace setting. Most courses do have an individually written paper at the end of each course, major paper in there. And so that would be an assignment. And then in the courses I teach, I give weight to these weekly activities. So when you saw that you would, read definitions of disasters and go out and find examples in the media, and then you'll write up a posting about that. So I'm looking for your critical analysis, your ability to take that media article and analyze it through the lens of the literature and post. And so then you're given grades based on that kind of activity. We have a question about, do we weigh some undergrad degrees more than others? So in your application, there's a section where you'll need to talk about if you've taken relevant courses. What we're looking for is for you to say to us how those degrees are relevant. and what courses you've had that are relevant. So if you can make a case that it's relevant, and this is where you need to do the thinking to say, here's how this relates to disaster management as a field of study. So students with a geography background, psychology background, sociology background. We've also had students who come with a degree in history, had a student with a degree in recreation. And so he's actually been very successful in transitioning to a job with the provincial government in emergency management, but there's also there's people in the tourism sector. So it's quite, what we say that disaster and emergency management is a distributed field of study and practice, meaning that emergency management folks work in transportation and airline industry. One of our students works at the operations center at an airport. So we have students who work at universities. We have students who work in hospitals. And so, you know, the degree that you'll bring in is going to be relevant to those different kinds of professions. So what we're looking for is, how do you see that situating and fitting within the disaster management field? So some degrees would be more relevant, yes, but many degrees can be relevant. How many students go on to do a PhD program? Great question, Cynthia. We've had several students. We actually have some of our faculty teaching in the program now. We're from our first intakes back in 2006, 2007, 2008, who've finished our program, went off to get a PhD, and are now back and teaching with us. So it's a small handful over the years. I'm going to say maybe less than a dozen in the last 10 years. But we do have students that go on, and then, well, of course, we love having them come back to teach for us. How many people are accepted into the program each year? Generally, each cohort will have up to 40 students in it. We also have students in our program who are students in the Master of Arts and Interdisciplinary Studies program. And so some students in those programs will take courses in our program. So the numbers that we have actually create space for that. We've also got students who are going to be joining us now from a Master of Arts in Tourism Management. We'll be able to do a specialization in disaster and emergency management. So as we have students in those other programs come in, the numbers that we take in overall of straight admissions are a little bit lower, because we create space for those additional students. Question about the course post-webinar. Oh, so yes, please contact learn.more, and then quite often, if Bev can't answer your questions, then she'll direct them over to me or someone in our program.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like that's all of the questions so far. If there's anything else bubbling, please pop it in our chat box. But Lucinda, you brought up such a great point that there will be questions that pop up post-webinar as well, and we hope that happens for all of you. So there will be a recording sent out to everyone who registered in the next day or so. And then myself, Jean, Bev, our international team are all here to continue answering questions post-webinar as well. So with that, we have hit exactly 1 o'clock Pacific time. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope to continue the conversation soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.